Commander Darius Vex was a soldier, not a king, but his fate was about to be decided in a way he never could have imagined. He stood on the blood-soaked ground of the alien battlefield, face to face with Xarkul, the unyielding, the brutal warlord of the Krakthar Dominion. Xarkul was a monster of a creature, towering and covered in dark, jagged armor that seemed to pulse with an almost unnatural energy. His eyes, red as embers, locked onto Darius with a hatred that burned through the air. The Krakthar were an ancient race of warriors, known for their ruthlessness in battle and their thirst for domination. Darius knew this fight wasn't just about winning. It was about the survival of humanity. If he failed here, Earth would fall under the control of these savage creatures, and there would be no one left to stop them. The odds were stacked against Darius. Xarkul had led countless campaigns to crush entire civilizations, but Darius was no ordinary soldier. He had been trained in every form of combat, had fought in wars no one should survive, and had learned the art of survival on the streets long before he joined the military. But facing Xarkul was something else entirely. The alien warlord's immense size and strength made him nearly unbeatable, and his brutal fighting style was unmatched. The air crackled with tension as they circled each other, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Darius was quick, his movements sharp and precise, but Xarkul was a force of nature. Every step the warlord took seemed to shake the ground beneath them. Darius's eyes darted to the surroundings, looking for an opening. But the Krakthar warrior was relentless, swinging his massive weapon with terrifying speed. It was a fight of wills, and Darius had to dig deep to keep up with the fury of the alien onslaught. One wrong move and it could all be over. Xarkul's weapon, a massive blade that could slice through a tank with ease, was an extension of the warlord's will. His strength was nearly incomprehensible, but Darius had an edge the alien didn't: his ability to think, to adapt in the heat of battle. With every strike from Xarkul, Darius found a way to move just enough to avoid the fatal blow, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then it came. The Krakthar warlord, overconfident from his previous victories, made a mistake. He swung his massive weapon too wide, leaving an opening. Darius saw it in an instant. With a swift, calculated strike, he lunged forward, dodging the warlord's blade and driving his own weapon deep into Xarkul's side. The warlord staggered, stunned by the unexpected move, his eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Darius pressed forward, using every ounce of his strength to twist the blade deeper, forcing Xarkul to the ground. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as Xarkul roared in pain, but it was too late. The mighty warlord had fallen, and with it, his iron grip on the Krakthar Dominion. Darius stood over him, breathing heavily, as the alien warrior's life force slowly drained from his body. The silence that followed was deafening. The battle was won, but Darius knew that the victory came with a cost. He had defeated the warlord, but this wasn't the end. The Krakthar were a proud and powerful race, and they would not accept his challenge lightly. Darius looked up at the sky, wondering what the consequences of this victory would be. He had won the fight, but now he had to face what came next. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. It was about the balance of power in the galaxy. The future of humanity was no longer just in the hands of the Terran military. It was now in Darius's hands, whether he was ready for it or not. Darius Vex had always been the kind of soldier who thrived on the battlefield, where the rules were clear: fight hard, fight smart, and survive. But the moment Xarkul the Unyielding fell, everything changed. The victory, which had seemed so sweet in the heat of battle, quickly turned sour. Darius was not just a hero. He had unwittingly inherited a whole new set of problems. As soon as the warlord hit the ground, the Krakthar High Council, a group of ancient and powerful leaders, took notice. The moment Xarkul's death was confirmed, Darius found himself summoned to an audience with the council, a council made up of some of the most influential and dangerous beings in the galaxy. Darius had expected praise for his incredible victory, but what he hadn't expected was the Krakthar law that came with it. According to the ancient customs of the Krakthar, the one who defeated a warlord in combat was obligated to take his place, not just as ruler, but also as the head of his household. And for Xarkal, that meant inheriting his two wives, who were as fearsome and complex as the warlord himself. General Zarakesh, the first wife, was a seasoned warrior with countless victories under her belt. Her reputation as a ruthless tactician and fighter had earned her respect and fear throughout the galaxy. Zara was no stranger to power and wasn't interested in the concept of love. She saw Darius only as a replacement for Xarkal. Her eyes, cold and calculating, met Darius's with barely contained disdain as the council made the announcement. She made it clear Darius would have to prove himself worthy of her allegiance, and that was not going to be easy. Lady Vela Ryan, the second wife, was a different challenge altogether. Where Zara was all strength and discipline, Vela was subtle, a master of manipulation and political maneuvering. She had a beauty that was striking but not in the conventional sense. Her eyes held secrets, and her smile was often laced with danger. She studied Darius with an air of curiosity, as if she was trying to figure out exactly what kind of man he was. Though she was soft-spoken, her words carried weight. She didn't see Darius as a warrior. To her, he was a pawn in a much larger game, a game she had been playing for years. The council's decision was final. Darius Vex, the Terran soldier who had come to defeat the warlord, now found himself the ruler of the Krakthar Dominion, bound by law to marry Zara and Vela, two women who had their own agendas. He was to assume the title of warlord, but his victory had come at a price far higher than he had ever anticipated. He would have to navigate a political minefield, balancing the brutal warrior expectations of Zara with the cunning and manipulation of Vela. One wrong move, and the entire Krakthar Dominion could turn against him. To make matters worse, Darius's reputation as a leader wasn't exactly established yet. Despite his victory over Xarkal, the Krakthar were fiercely proud and loyal to their fallen warlord. Many saw Darius's rise as a betrayal of their traditions. The moment he stepped foot in the warlord's palace, he could feel the tension in the air. The Krakthar warriors, some of them older and far more experienced than him, watched him with narrowed eyes. It was clear that respect would not come easily. Zara, the warrior who had once served Xarkal, was a constant reminder of just how far Darius had to go to earn his place among them. Then there was Vela, always watching, always planning. Darius could tell that her interest in him was more than just curiosity. She wanted to see what kind of leader he would be, and whether he was capable of shaping the Krakthar Dominion into something new. The pressure was on, and Darius had to move quickly to establish himself as more than just a human who had killed an alien warlord. He had to become a ruler, a leader who could unite the Krakthar people under his command. But the most shocking part of it all was the realization that his life was no longer his own. Darius had defeated Xarkal, but now he was shackled by an alien law that forced him into a marriage with two women who were as powerful as they were dangerous. And for a soldier who had spent his entire life fighting for survival, being forced to fight for his place in the Krakthar Dominion was the real battle. Darius Vex had never imagined that victory could feel so suffocating. The moment he stepped into Xarkal's warlord estate, it became clear that the true battle had just begun. He was no longer a lone soldier, fighting for humanity's survival. Now he was the ruler of a brutal and ancient empire. And more shockingly, the husband to General Zarakesh and Lady Vela Ryan, two women who had their own histories, their own power, and their own plans. The Krakthar were not known for their mercy, and neither of his wives showed any sign of being soft-hearted or easily impressed. Zara, the fierce general, wasted no time making her opinion known. She had no respect for Darius. To her, he was just a man who had slain a warlord, nothing more. Her eyes, cold and calculating, sized him up as if he were nothing more than another challenger for her place at the top. "You may have won Sarkel's crown," she said, her voice thick with disdain, "but you have not earned my loyalty." She made it clear that Darius would need to prove his worth every single day if he hoped to keep the Krakthar under his command, and to earn her respect. But Zara didn't care about winning her affection. What mattered to her was strength, and Darius would have to show that he had it in abundance. On the other hand, Vela was far more subtle in her approach. Unlike Zara, she didn't want to intimidate Darius, at least not overtly. She was a master of manipulation and had a knack for knowing what strings to pull. Her demeanor was calm and measured, and her smile was like a blade hidden beneath soft words. Vela was a strategist, and it was clear that she didn't see Darius as a mere pawn, but as a tool to shape the Krakthar dominion into something entirely new. She could be kind when she wanted, but Darius could sense that every conversation with her was part of a game where he wasn't entirely sure of the rules. Darius tried to remain focused, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in a trap. He had expected to return to Earth a hero, but now he was forced to navigate the complex politics of a violent alien empire. It wasn't just about leading an army anymore. It was about leading an entire species of warriors, each with their own ambitions, rivalries, and power struggles. And then there were his wives. Zara wanted to see Darius fight for his position, to prove that he could handle the power that came with it. But Vela, she was playing a different game altogether. Her true motives were hidden behind her polite smile, and Darius couldn't help but wonder what she wanted from him. The first few days in the Warlord's palace were a blur. There were endless meetings with military leaders, discussions with political figures, and confrontations with Krakthar warriors who didn't recognize him as their ruler. Each of them looked at him like he was an imposter, as if Darius didn't belong. And Zara was no help. Every time he made a decision, she would challenge him, questioning his judgment and testing his resolve. Darius was used to fighting on the battlefield, but this was different. The battlefield was now the Warlord's throne room, and the stakes were higher than ever before. As for Vela, she seemed content to sit back and watch. Darius wasn't sure if she was genuinely trying to help him, or if she was waiting for him to make a mistake. She was always present, always observing, her sharp mind calculating his every move. At times, she would offer advice, subtle suggestions that always seemed to come with an underlying motive. Darius had no doubt that she had plans of her own, and those plans might not align with his. But through it all, Darius realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for control over the Krakthar dominion, control over the future of his people, and control over his own destiny. But more than that, he was fighting for the one thing he had never thought he would need to fight for: his place in this strange and hostile world of power, politics, and marriage. And as Darius stood there, caught between two women who had the strength of entire armies, he knew one thing for sure: the real war had only just begun. Darius Vex's life as the new warlord of the Krakthar dominion was quickly spiraling into chaos. The uneasy peace he had hoped to establish was slipping away, piece by piece. His every decision was scrutinized, and every move seemed to spark new tensions among the Krakthar. The warriors watched him with a mixture of doubt and disdain, while the political figures whispered behind his back. But Darius's problems were just beginning. The moment Sarkel had died, a power vacuum had opened up, and not everyone was happy with the new warlord taking over. There were factions within the Krakthar, loyalists to the old regime, who would do anything to see him fall. It started one quiet night. Darius had barely slept, still adjusting to his new life. He was in his chambers, sitting at a large table, going over the warlord's plans, when he heard a faint noise. A shadow slipped under the door. Before Darius could react, the figure lunged at him, a sharp blade flashing through the dim light. The assassin was quick, but not quick enough. Darius's instincts kicked in, and he managed to dodge the first strike. He reached for the weapon at his side, a blade forged by the Krakthar themselves, and blocked the next attack. The assassin was fast, but Darius was faster. With a swift move, he disarmed the would-be killer and pinned him against the wall. Breathing heavily, Darius stared into the assassin's eyes, realizing the true depth of the threat against him. The Kragthar didn't play by Earth's rules, and they would never allow a human to sit on their throne without resistance. The assassin's lips curled into a smirk, as if this was all part of a larger plan. "You think you can rule them," he spat. "You'll never be their warlord." Before Darius could question him further, the assassin's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. A hidden poison had done its job. Darius cursed under his breath. The situation was more dangerous than he thought. There was a faction of Kragthar warriors who were still loyal to Exarchal, and they weren't going to stop until Darius was dead. The next morning, Darius called for a council meeting. He needed to figure out who was behind the attack. But just as he prepared to make his announcement, Zarakesh, the general, interrupted. She was standing at the door, arms crossed, her face cold as ever. "I told you this wouldn't be easy," she said. "The Kragthar don't trust you. You've killed their leader, but you haven't earned their respect." Her words cut deeper than any weapon. Darius had hoped for support from Zara, but she only seemed to want to see him fail. Vela, ever the strategist, stood quietly in the back. Unlike Zara, she wasn't quick to judge. Her eyes glimmered with a mix of curiosity and concern. She had heard the news of the assassination attempt and wasn't surprised. "You've already stepped on too many toes," Vela said, her voice smooth. "There are those who want to see you fall, Darius. But don't worry, not all of them are enemies. Some just need to be persuaded." Darius felt the weight of her words. Vela was right. The situation was far more complicated than he'd realized. There were alliances and rivalries within the Kragthar that he didn't fully understand. The Kragthar people didn't care about diplomacy or treaties. They respected power, and Darius was still learning how to wield it. Zara may have been a warrior, but Vela knew the game better than anyone. The following days were a blur of planning, training, and constant tension. Zara pushed Darius harder than ever before, testing his resolve at every turn. Each training session felt like a battle for his life, but it was the only way to prove himself to the Kragthar. Meanwhile, Vela quietly worked behind the scenes, making deals with political figures and military leaders, trying to consolidate power for Darius in a way that wouldn't make him appear weak. It was a delicate balancing act, and Darius had to tread carefully. At night, the pressure seemed to intensify. Zara would storm into his chambers, demanding answers, challenging him on every decision. Darius was no stranger to conflict, but the constant tension was wearing him down between Zara's unrelenting challenges and Vela's calculating approach. Both women had their own desires, their own expectations of him, and neither seemed content to leave him in peace. At times, Darius wondered if the greatest battle he would face would be within the walls of his own home. But as the days went on, Darius began to understand something crucial. The Kragthar didn't just test strength. They tested a leader's ability to survive in a world where betrayal was a constant companion. The real war wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with wits, manipulation, and the will to endure. And Darius Vex was beginning to realize that in this Game of Thrones, there were no rules, only power, and he would have to prove that he was worthy of it, no matter the cost. Darius Vex had never imagined that ruling the Warlord Empire would be so intricate, so dangerous. After the assassination attempt, the air around him had grown thick with suspicion, and every decision seemed like a potential trap. The Kragthar weren't just warriors. They were a race built on betrayal and secrets, and Darius was stuck right in the middle of it all. But what he didn't know yet was that the attack on his life was only a small part of a much larger, more sinister plot. Zarakesh, his first wife, and the seasoned warrior, had made it clear that she was waiting for Darius to prove himself, but she had never been forthcoming with her own plans. Darius could feel the pressure mounting as she continually questioned his leadership, pushing him to make decisions that would either solidify his power or destroy it. Zara wasn't just testing his strength. She was trying to break him. The worst part, he wasn't sure whether she was trying to make him stronger or just waiting for him to make a fatal mistake. Her challenges came without warning, constant, relentless, as if she had no faith in him. Every day, it felt as though she was watching him, waiting to see if he'd crumble under the pressure. Then there was Vela Ryan, the second wife, who was much more subtle in her approach. Vela wasn't interested in direct confrontation. Instead, she played the long game, pulling strings, making quiet alliances, whispering advice to the right people, and waiting for the right moment to strike. While Zara was busy testing his will, Vela was quietly manipulating the tides of power. Darius didn't know whether to trust her, but one thing was certain. She had an agenda, and it didn't always align with his own. She had suggested that Darius should take a more diplomatic approach, but every time he followed her advice, it felt as though he was losing a little more of his independence. And then there were the whispers, the rumors that surrounded her. Some said she had connections with the political factions who wanted to see Darius fail. Others believed she was simply waiting for the right time to usurp him. The tension within the Warlord's palace was almost unbearable. Darius spent sleepless nights trying to piece together the web of lies and secrets that seemed to choke the very air he breathed. One evening, after a particularly brutal training session with Zara, Darius found himself in the palace's garden, staring out into the distance. The garden, once a symbol of peace and beauty, had become a place of refuge for him, away from the constant games and manipulation. But even here, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched. He turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, was Lord Kalon, a high-ranking Krakthar noble who had been one of Sarkul's closest allies. Kalon was a man of few words, but his reputation for treachery was well known. He was a master of forging alliances and betraying them when it suited him. Darius had always considered Kalon a threat, but he hadn't realized how deep the man's web of influence stretched. Kalon's cold, calculating eyes met Darius's, and without any preamble, he spoke. "You think you've won, Darius Vex, but the Krakthar are not loyal to you. They're loyal to power. And right now, that power is slipping through your fingers." Darius tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the blade at his side. Kalon, however, simply smiled, as if he knew that Darius wouldn't strike. "I didn't come here to threaten you," Kalon continued. "I came to offer you a warning. There are forces within the Dominion that want you dead, but I'm not one of them." Kalon's words were a puzzle, each one more confusing than the last. Was he warning Darius or simply toying with him? The noble's cryptic message was the final confirmation Darius needed. The power struggle was far more complex than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about fighting for control over the Krakthar. It was about surviving the deadly politics that surrounded him. Back in the palace, Darius felt the weight of the situation growing heavier. His wives, Zara and Vela, were playing their own games. Kalon was lurking in the shadows, and the Krakthar were watching his every move. He had no choice but to fight on multiple fronts. The battle wasn't just about strength or leadership. It was about trust. Who could he trust? And more importantly, who could he defeat without being destroyed in the process? The more Darius uncovered, the more he realized that his victory over Sarkul had set off a chain of events that couldn't be undone. His place in the Krakthar Dominion wasn't secure, far from it. And as long as he had enemies lurking in the shadows, Darius's life would never be the same. He was trapped in a web of lies, surrounded by rivals, and the only way out was to take control of the game and win it. But even that would come with a price. The cost of power was more than Darius had bargained for. Darius Vex had always been a soldier, trained to face enemies head-on, to fight with honor and strength. But the war he was now engaged in was nothing like the battles he had fought on Earth. This war was one of shadows, manipulation, and betrayal. With every decision he made, he had to look over his shoulder, unsure of who might be waiting to strike. His enemies were no longer just the Kragthar warriors who doubted him. They were everywhere, hiding behind every corner, every whisper, and every false smile. Zara-Kesh, his first wife, and the Kragthar general had become even more distant. She had warned him when he first took the throne that the Kragthar would never accept him as their leader unless he could prove himself. But now, it felt like her doubts were growing. Every time Darius made a decision, Zara would challenge him, questioning his judgment, demanding more from him. It was clear she didn't trust him, not as a leader and certainly not as her husband. Valerian, on the other hand, had become more elusive. At first, Darius had believed she might be the more reasonable of the two, the one who could help him navigate the treacherous world of Kragthar politics. But now, he couldn't help but feel like she was playing him too. Vela's quiet manipulations had taken root in the palace. She was gathering allies in the background, making deals with nobles and military leaders, all the while pretending to support Darius openly. He couldn't tell if she was working with him, or if she was just waiting for the right moment to turn on him. But Darius's greatest concern wasn't the games being played within the palace walls. It was the growing threat outside. The Kragthar had enemies beyond their borders, and those enemies had become all too aware of the power vacuum left by Xarkel's death. There were whispers of a new enemy, a shadowy group of rebels who called themselves the Eclipsed. They had been quietly organizing for years, waiting for the moment when Xarkel's empire would falter and Darius would take the throne. Now that the time had come, the Eclipsed were making their move. One night, as Darius sat alone in his Warlord chambers, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Darren Vector, the leader of the Kragthar intelligence network. His face was unreadable, but Darius could tell by the way his eyes were narrowed that something was terribly wrong. "We've received reports," Darren began, his voice low. "The Eclipsed are mobilizing. They've been spreading rumors, stirring unrest in the outer territories. If we don't act quickly, they could unite the entire southern sector against us." Darius clenched his fists. He had heard rumors of the Eclipsed, but this was the first time they had been confirmed. The Eclipsed weren't just a rebel faction. They were a force, a highly organized group with its own army. If they managed to rally the discontented Kragthar warriors, they could bring down everything Darius had fought for. His grip on the throne would crumble, and the Kragthar would fall into chaos. The Eclipsed had the power to undo everything he had built, and Darius couldn't let that happen. As Darren continued to explain the situation, Darius's mind raced. He needed to move quickly, but he had so many enemies within his own palace that he couldn't trust anyone, not even his wives. He couldn't afford to make a wrong move. Zara was already skeptical of his ability to lead, and Vela, though politically savvy, might be too wrapped up in her own agenda to help. "We need to strike first," Darren said, breaking through Darius's thoughts. "We need to find their leader, make an example of them, and crush the rebellion before it spreads any further." But Darius wasn't so sure. The Kragthar had always respected strength, but they also respected honor. Striking too soon, without understanding the true strength of the Eclipsed, could backfire. Darius had learned the hard way that the Kragthar didn't forgive easily, and he didn't want to risk alienating his own people. He paced back and forth, his mind racing. He had to figure out a way to deal with the Eclipsed, but he also had to watch his back. He couldn't afford to let his personal struggles with Zara and Vela blind him to the dangers from the outside. As much as he wanted to trust his wives, he couldn't help but wonder if they were using him to further their own ambitions. And if that was the case, who else could he trust? Darius knew he had no choice but to act. He would need to make a decision quickly, before the Eclipsed grew too powerful. He had already fought for his life once. Now he would have to fight for the future of the Kragthar Dominion. But this time, the stakes were even higher, and the enemies weren't just outside the walls. They were within. and Darius would have to navigate this treacherous game with even greater caution if he was to survive. Darius Vex stood on the balcony of his Warlord chambers, staring out at the sprawling Kragthar city below. The bustling streets and towering spires that stretched towards the blood-red sky seemed peaceful from this distance, but Darius knew better. Beneath the calm surface, a storm was brewing, a storm he was at the center of. The eclipsed were growing stronger by the day, and every move Darius made felt like a step closer to either victory or his downfall. The weight of leadership, of command, was more suffocating than he could have imagined. But there was no turning back now. Darren Vector's words echoed in his mind. Strike first. Destroy them before they destroy you. It was sound advice. The eclipsed had become more than just a rebellion. They were a movement, one that threatened the entire foundation of the Kragthar Dominion. But how could Darius act decisively when the very people he relied on were pulling him in different directions? Zarakesh, his first wife and the fierce general, had made it clear that she wanted war, immediate action. She had no patience for diplomacy or delay. She wanted blood, and she wanted it now. On the other hand, Vela Rayan, his second wife, had been whispering of alliances, speaking of forging peace with the more moderate factions of the Kragthar to stabilize his position before making any rash moves. Her calm demeanor hid the cold, calculating mind beneath. But Darius wasn't sure if he could trust her. How could he, when he still wasn't certain where her true loyalties lay? Every moment he hesitated, the situation grew more dire. In the days following Darren's warning, Darius called for a council. He needed advice, strategy, and clarity. The room was thick with tension as the various generals and nobles took their seats. The Kragthar were a proud people, and their warriors had no love for weakness. Darius knew that every eye in the room was on him, waiting to see what kind of warlord he truly was. Would he be a tyrant like Xarkal, ruling through fear and brutality, or would he forge a new path, one of cunning and diplomacy? Zarakesh was the first to speak, her voice hard as stone. "We cannot sit idly by," she said, her eyes gleaming with intensity. "The eclipsed are gaining ground, and if we do not strike now, we will lose the momentum. A swift strike is the only way to end this." Her hands rested on the hilt of her weapon, as if she was ready to charge into battle at that very moment. Darius could feel her frustration simmering beneath the surface. Zara had always believed in strength, showing it, wielding it, and dominating with it. But the Kragthar were not just about strength. They were about respect, and Darius knew that respect was earned, not given. Then Vela Rayan spoke, her voice smooth and calculated. "Zara is right, in a way. But war is not always the best solution. If we strike without proper planning, we risk pushing more Kragthar to join the eclipsed. We need to divide them, create factions, make them turn on each other." Darius glanced at her, but something in her eyes made him uneasy. Vela was playing the long game, and he couldn't decide if she was working for him or for her own agenda. Before Darius could respond, a new voice broke through the tension. It was Ron Vaker, the leader of the southern Kragthar tribes, a man known for his ruthlessness and cunning. Rayan had always been an unpredictable ally, but he had the power to sway the outcome of any conflict in the Dominion. "What if we offer the eclipsed a choice?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. "Instead of crushing them outright, we offer them a chance to join us. If they refuse, then we strike. But if they accept, we bring them into the fold. We gain their loyalty, and we eliminate a threat without further bloodshed." The room fell silent. Rayan's suggestion was unorthodox, even controversial, but it was also bold. A chance to avoid a full-scale war while eliminating the eclipsed threat in one move. Darius was torn. This strategy could work, but it would require an enormous amount of trust. Could he trust the eclipsed to follow through? Could he trust his own people not to see this as a sign of weakness? Darius looked around the room at the faces of those who had supported him. Zara, Vela, Rayan, and even the silent nobles who had yet to speak. He had always believed that the path to power. "Let's test it," Darius said, his voice steady. The room erupted into murmurs, some approving, others skeptical. Zara's expression was unreadable, while Vela's lips curled into a faint smile, as if she had just won a victory. Darius felt the weight of the decision pressing on his shoulders. Now Darius was faced with a dangerous new game, a game of diplomacy and power plays where one wrong move could destroy everything. But this was the life he had chosen, and for better or for worse, he was going to play it to the end. The days that followed Darius Vex's decision were marked by a tense silence that hung heavily over the Kragthar dominion. He had chosen diplomacy, a risky move that would either solidify his rule or fracture it beyond repair. The emissaries were sent to the Eclipsed, offering them a chance to join the Kragthar and end the conflict without further bloodshed. But as the days passed, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another game. A game where he was being tested by forces beyond his control. Zarakesh, ever the warrior, had been the first to challenge Darius's decision. "Do you think they'll just submit?" she had asked, her voice full of skepticism. "The Eclipsed are not a people who bow easily. They've already made their intentions clear. They want the dominion for themselves. We should strike before they grow too strong." Darius had listened to her, but he knew that brute force wasn't the answer this time. The Kragthar were more than just a people of war. They were proud of their traditions and their strength. Darius needed to show them that he could lead with wisdom as well as might. If he failed, if the emissaries returned with empty hands, the Kragthar would view him as weak, and that would be a dangerous thing. Vela Ryan, however, had been more supportive of Darius's decision. Her calculating mind saw the potential in Ronveker's suggestion. She had always been one to play the long game, to build alliances where others saw only enemies. "If you're going to win, Darius, you must understand that this is more than just a battle for power," she had told him in private. "It's a battle for the hearts and minds of the Kragthar. If they see you as a leader who can unite them, they will follow you. But if they sense any doubt in your resolve, they will turn against you." Darius knew Vela spoke the truth, but he couldn't shake the doubt that had settled in his chest. The Eclipsed had become a shadow that loomed over him, and every day that passed without a response from them made him more nervous. He couldn't afford to wait forever, not with Zara pushing for action, not with the ever-present threat of betrayal hanging over him. Then a message came, a sealed scroll carried by a silent messenger from the Eclipsed. Darius's heart raced as he broke the seal, the words inside chilling him to the bone. The Eclipsed were not accepting his offer. They had rejected peace and had sworn to bring down his rule. Worse still, they were rallying disgruntled factions within the Kragthar, promising them a better future under their banner. Darius felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. The Eclipsed were not just rebels. They were a movement, a force with the power to reshape the entire Kragthar dominion. His decision to offer them peace had failed. And now, the only path left was war. But what kind of war? One of total annihilation, or one that could rally the Kragthar to his side, showing them that he was the one they needed to follow. He met with his generals in the war room that evening, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on his shoulders. Zara was the first to speak, her voice filled with eager anticipation. "Now we fight. Now we show them the strength of the Kragthar. We crush the Eclipse before they have a chance to rally more supporters. We strike hard, and we strike fast." Darius didn't respond right away. He looked at the faces around the table, each one waiting for his decision. The tension in the room was palpable, and Darius felt the pressure of his position more acutely than ever before. His heart told him that Zara was right, that the only way to maintain control was to act decisively. But his mind kept returning to what Vela had said. This was not just a battle for power. It was a test of leadership, of vision. Could he defeat the Eclipsed in battle and still unite the Kragthar under his rule? As he stared at the map of the Kragthar territories spread out before him, Darius thought about the cost of power, It wasn't just the lives that would be lost in battle. It was the trust that could be shattered, the alliances that could be destroyed, the people who might turn against him if they saw him as just another warlord interested in only conquest. He had to find a way to balance strength with strategy. Darius took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We will prepare for battle," he said, his voice firm. "But we will not burn everything to the ground. We will strike where they are weakest and force them to bend to our will. And if we can, we will offer them the chance to join us. One last chance for peace. But if they refuse again," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew what would happen next. The war was coming, and Darius knew that he would have to fight with every ounce of his strength to win, not just the battle, but the future of the Kragthar dominion itself. The price of power was steep, but Darius was ready to pay it. The tension in the war room was unbearable. Darius Vex had made his decision. War was now inevitable. The Eclipsed had rejected his offer, and their growing strength had left him no choice but to respond with force. His generals were already preparing for the clash, and every warrior in the Kragthar dominion was sharpening their weapons, ready for the coming battle. The fate of the dominion rested on Darius's shoulders, and with every passing hour, the weight of his choices grew heavier. Zarakesh stood at the front of the room, her posture rigid with anticipation. She was ready to fight, to prove that she had been right all along, that strength, decisive action, and the will to dominate were the only things that mattered. "We strike at dawn," she said, her voice like steel. "The Eclipsed think they can challenge us, but they will learn soon enough that no one can stand against the might of the Kragthar." Darius could see the fire in her eyes. Zara had always been a warrior at heart, and her impatience for war had grown stronger over the days. But Darius's thoughts were clouded, and the image of Vela Ryan's cold, calculating gaze lingered in his mind. Vela had advised caution, urging him to hold back until they had more intelligence on the Eclipsed's forces. She had warned him that attacking recklessly could alienate the more moderate factions within the Kragthar, those who still believed in unity. But there was no time left for debate. Darius knew that if the Kragthar were to survive, they needed to strike now. The Eclipsed had already rallied several territories to their cause, and delaying any longer could prove disastrous. He had to show strength, but also cunning, if he wanted to emerge from this battle as the undisputed ruler of the Kragthar. The war drums began to beat in the distance, signaling that the time had come. Darius gave one last look at his generals: Zara, who burned with the desire for battle; Ranvaker, who stood silently, calculating the risks; and Vela, whose face remained impassive, but whose eyes betrayed a hint of concern. The time for second-guessing was over. "Prepare for battle," Darius commanded. "We strike at their stronghold and crush them before they can regroup. We fight with honor, but we fight to win." The armies gathered in the streets, lining up in formation, each warrior looking to Darius for the strength to lead them. He could feel the weight of their gazes on him, their hopes and fears resting on his shoulders. The battle ahead would not only decide the fate of the Kragthar, but the kind of leader Darius would be remembered as. Would he be a conqueror, ruling through fear and force, or a unifier, who brought his people together through strength and wisdom? The sun began to rise, casting a blood-red light over the battlefield, as Darius led his army toward the Eclipsed stronghold. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and tension. The first clash of weapons rang out as the Kragthar forces collided with the Eclipsed. Darius fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he had, his blade cutting through enemy lines. But as the battle raged on, he could see the cracks in his forces. Some of the Kragthar warriors fought with reckless abandon, while others hesitated, unsure of their leader's true intentions. Darius fought his way through the battlefield, his mind focused on one thing: victory. He couldn't afford to falter, not now, not when the future of the Kragthar was at stake. But as the battle wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here, something he had missed. The Eclipsed, though outnumbered, fought with an intensity that suggested they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger, something that Darius didn't fully understand. It wasn't until he reached the heart of the Eclipsed stronghold that he realized the truth. The leader of the Eclipsed, a man known as Corran Darkrun, stood before him, waiting. He wasn't the monster Darius had imagined, but a man with a purpose. "You were a fool to think we would simply kneel before you," Corran said, his voice cold but filled with conviction. "We are not just rebels. We are the future of the Kragthar. You may have won this battle, but you will never win the war. Not with fear alone." Darius was taken aback by Corran's words. He had thought the Eclipsed were just a group of power-hungry warriors, but now he saw something else, a vision. The Kragthar Dominion had been built on strength, but perhaps there was more to leadership than just conquering. Perhaps there was a way to unite his people, to bring together the fractured factions, and build something better. The battle ended with the fall of Corran, but Darius couldn't help but feel that the war had only just begun. But about unity. As the dust settled over the battlefield, Darius Vex knew that the future of the Kragthar was in his hands, and no matter the cost, he was ready to lead.